Hello and welcome again to Dojo Live. My name is Kim Lantis. I'll be your host today with Carlos Ponce. He's joining us from Nearsoft's Mexico City office. I myself am in our Hermosillo office. So thank you, Carlos.
Hey, thank you, Kim, as ever.
So for those of you, if you don't like Mondays like most people, today's talk is for you. So I guess the question is, what would it be like or feel like to come to work every day armed with passion, armed with freedom? And today's guest, Perry Timms, is going to talk to us about that. Perry is the founder and CEO, which is Chief Energy Officer of PTHR, which is People and Transformational HR Ltd. So thank you for joining us, Perry.
Buenos dias, thank you. Yeah, really pleased to be here. So I'm in my office in the UK, where it is now 6 p.m. So it's very dark here. But inside, you're right. There's a whole kind of energy source that I think is what work is all about for me. So the title Chief Energy Officer was something I chose just as a little kind of gentle wordplay on the fact that I'm CEO of myself. It's just me in my company. But I think one of the important roles of a CEO is to create energy and to channel energy from all the people that are working in an enterprise. So there is a kind of playfulness about it. But yeah, I'm really pleased to be here.
Thank you. And I really like that idea, the Chief Energy Officer. We're so used to the Chief Executive Officer, which is part of what we're going to be talking about today. And that's just the idea of rethinking the way that companies can work. And I think that it's important, I think, for anyone, particularly those who are founders of companies, to realize that the energy, the whole feel of the entire workplace, in a way, I think starts with them and depends on them. So I think it's very cool insight.
Definitely, yeah. So I think if you look at a renowned chief executive like Herb Kelleher at Southwest Airlines, one of the most famous ones, he's renowned for his walking around the floor, saying hello to people, being positive about their sort of impact on his workforce, and he definitely lifts the energy and he creates a kind of belief that people are energized towards. So yeah, you're right, it's an important role.
I think, and I have to shout this out to our own founder, Roberto Martinez. I have to say, I've been with Nearsoft for almost a year now, and I remember when my first week in the office, he came in and he's like, "Hey Kim, good to see you here. How is it going? How's your first week?" And the first thing I thought was like, he knows my name.
Yeah.
And then I was actually having that conversation too, just the other day with a member of our people development team, and she mentioned to herself that we have an onboarding process here at Nearsoft where we bring those from our Mexico City or our Chihuahua offices to Hermosillo, which is our largest office. And for those people who might have husbands or wives or children, their children are able to come and everything. And she herself was also thrown aback because Roberto's first question for her was, "How is your daughter? How is she adjusting?" You know, it could have been work related. It could have been anything. And I think that's really, really important, the energy that we all admit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Perry. No, I was just going to say before we jump into to actually pass on the mic to Perry so he can elaborate on his chosen topic. What really pulls my attention also is this fact that for the most part in self-managed organizations, it's very common that these organizations are horizontal and they're not hierarchical, which means also most of the time that there are no titles, right? But on the other hand, I mean, you are choosing for yourself, Perry, the title of Chief Energy Officer, which is something that I assume that you have crafted for yourself based on your own view of things. And I think that's a rather creative approach that even, I don't know, gives you the drive to keep doing things in a very specific way, in a very energetic way, creative, fun way, right?
Yeah.
So, but without further ado, what I'd like to do is simply pass on the mic to you. And if you can tell us, you chose the topic self-managed organizations at scale.
Yeah.
So, again, welcome to the show. And please tell us all about it, Perry. The mic's all yours. And
cool, that's
Kim.
great, thank you. Yeah, so I think my fascination with self-organized teams and self-management goes back probably about 8 or 9 years now. So, and I worked in an organization that was 1,000 people in total. So that's not exactly the biggest organization in the world. But when I discovered the whole concept of self-organized, most of the companies I came across were 10 people, 20 people, 50 people, 100 people. And I can remember a point about 4 years ago when I was at a book launch about employee engagement. And they were talking about how you need to kind of reach people and understand their purpose and their motives, and that will get them engaged and that will help them build your business and drive it on. And it was in the offices of a very large consultancy company in the UK. And their VP of HR was helping to sort of set the context for this book about engagement. And I just sat there and thought, if you work in this enormous, monolithic, massive building, and you are just one of several 10,000 people maybe who are operating in that company, how can you be engaged with your company? You are so minute in this machine. So having that kind of realization, I point blank asked the guy, and I said, look, can anybody who works in a large company ever really be engaged? And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, it's a big problem of ours. And I would have to answer, it would be difficult. So he then proceeded to tell me how that his company was taking an approach which was trying to bring the company's feel nearer to a group of people who were either geographically connected or who were perhaps professionally connected in a certain area. He says, we're a big company, he says, but we want to get small. We want to get tight, and we want to put a stronger feel of connectedness and community around people. And it was at that point that I realized just how easy it is to talk yourself out of self-organized systems and communal bases at work because you think you're too big, because you think it won't matter, because you think it won't scale, you think you can't do it. Yet this was a guy working in a very large company, and that kept him awake at night. And I think ever since then, when I've sort of, I guess, explored the world of self-organized teams, I've wondered why so many people are so reluctant to go down that route if the company is of a large size. And I hear lots of stories of companies who get to a certain size, and maybe it's the magical 150, and then when they start to get over 150, they start to bring more structure in, they start to bring more levels in. And most of the people who joined that enterprise, because it was a family and a community and it was a really tight connected, everybody helps everybody out, suddenly don't recognize where they work, and it loses the magic and it becomes just another grey corporation. And I guess that saddens me because, Kim, when you started, you talked about how much people have a Monday feeling, which is like, oh, really? Do I have to? And then they think about economics and think, yes, I have to. And it does sadden me that people feel that they have to go and transact their way through a job or a career, and they then feel less connected in a human sense to the thing that they're doing. And so that got me wondering whether big companies can ever recreate some feel of purpose and humanity and so on. And so this is where self-organized really sort of hits for me, because I think the more a company has a big structure and a kind of predictable hierarchical feel, it creates a very mechanistic and transactional approach to people, whereas the smaller ones are tight and adaptive and so on, and feel very much part of a community where people know people and can adapt with them and help them out much more. So there's a definite void of humanity in between those two sizes. Yet I guess my hope is that a big company can still be almost, I guess, like Tony Hsieh's doing at Zappos. He's looking at Zappos as an organization which really is representative of a city where a number of different things can exist side by side and operate in a sort of cultural way where things aren't managed, but things happen. People exist, people find a way, people learn, people connect, and people do things. So I'm really interested in systems and people, I guess. And so that's where I think I'm coming at it from this talk, which is really, are we intellectually not able to conceive a large organization which doesn't have rigid structure and rigid hierarchical control mechanisms, or are we just afraid that actually that construct is the only thing that holds people together to do work? So I guess that's my sort of premise, really. And I guess I haven't got any answers. I haven't seen a massive, huge organization of tens of thousands of people that say, look, we have no managers, we have no job titles, we are completely self-organized, we just randomly make things up as we go along. And I do wonder whether we're able to scale that kind of system to that sort of level, or whether it needs a tightness and whether it needs small bands of people. So I genuinely don't have an answer, but I think I want to pose much more of a sort of philosophical question and start to see whether there's a way we can engineer large organizations to become just a frame around a whole group of interconnected people who are self-organized.
I like that idea, and I think you're onto something in the sense that, at the very least, the first step of anything is to be aware of it.
Yeah.
And so at least creating awareness and the desire, the community desire to create that, to see that, and have more and more people wondering, how can we get there? What's working? What isn't working?
Yeah.
And figure it out. I mean, I know with Doug Kirkpatrick, I believe, with his story with Morning Glory, is that the name of the company? Morning Star. Thank you.
Yeah.
Which I understand to be quite a sizable company, and
Yeah.
it seems to work. So I mean, there is that hope there. I think a lot of it boils down to vision and keeping people motivated more than anything. I think this is kind of funny because I'm not trying to make this whole talk a platform about Nearsoft by any means, but I think what someone, Iris, I believe, from People Development, had posed the question to Roberto of this year, 2016, for us has been a large growth year. We've brought in over 80 people. So out of 250 people, I mean, that's quite a jump. And so her question was, what are you afraid of? Like, what are you afraid of when we grow? And his answer off the top of his head was, I'm afraid of people getting comfortable. I'm afraid of stagnation. Not afraid of the culture, of our coolness or the fun things that we do, but people just no longer, bringing themselves with all of them. So what are your thoughts? Like, what are ways that we can do?
So I think that's a really interesting proposition, isn't it? I think so. Some of the stuff I've looked at around self-organized has taken me back actually to people who were researching and talking about this stuff before anybody had really coined the phrase even self-organized. So I think we're talking about even pre-Morning Star and pre-Ricardo Semler. So I think we're talking about the 1970s and into the 1980s and the 1990s. And so so I think it's fascinating how people were starting to see, I guess, what you would call the drudgery of work starting to hit in around the 1970s, where we'd probably gone through a period where industrialization and mechanization was kind of making more impact on the jobs that we did. And I guess if we look at industrial jobs, there were still quite a lot of people in industry at that time, working in factories and on production lines and working in agriculture. And then I think something probably happened with the advent of the personal computer and so on in the 1980s, where we started to see knowledge work going up and industrial work going down. And I think what we're starting to see is people who are looking at their work and their life not as two separate episodic events in a day, and they're starting to look at this intermingling, and then you start thinking
that it's with you all
exactly.
the time.
Exactly. If we track it back to things like the advent of the BlackBerry, it's when people suddenly started to realize they couldn't literally switch off. They didn't have an end of day. It would take itself with them to the commute and stuff. And it's all a natural part of what we do now. And in fact, there's a lot of people who have made the choice now to continue and work in a way that they want to. So the fact that it's 6:16 here in the UK in the afternoon, there are still people sat in the office, there are still people working on trains and so on and so forth. So it's all changed a lot. But I think we started to see people get animated and excited about their work because they could see that it was something where, it was intellectually stretching for them and it was part of an enterprise and so on. So it felt much less like a transactional extension of an industrial machine, and it became much more about the knowledge you bring, the adaptability and the creativity, I guess, that comes to bear. And so even in what you could argue are, sort of non-desk office jobs that people are doing in the care industry, people are doing in the emergency services, whatever it is, people have now started to discover that actually the reason they're in that job is not just because they were lucky or trained, or there's a calling, there's a purpose, there's something in them that's aligning themselves helping people or rescuing people or whatever it might be. And so I think we've unraveled now this distinction between transactional work that's just purely economical and machine-like, and this, it's me, it's an expression of me, it's a part of me. So going back to your comment about comfort and stagnation, I think there is a fear there that when you make things either not so challenging and stimulating, and it kind of feels like it's just business as usual every day, I could understand people starting to think, this feels like the drudgery of work, but just a more modern, funky version. And so I think there is something in that. How do you still create that stimulus, that part of something? And I guess one of the things I looked at in the research was how much people have, and it was by Russell Ackoff's work on people and systems, how much people have a need for affiliation. And that affiliation is with others. That affiliation is with an enterprise that has taken them into their workplace and skilled them and given them some interesting work. It's an affiliation, I think, with a mission in life. It's an affiliation with a community. It's an affiliation with what I keep calling your gift to the world. What are you offering the world? So I think as long as we can keep that need for affiliation uppermost in our thoughts, where we allocate people to work, where we suggest there's a career path, where we identify a new project they could get involved in, if that affiliation is still there, I think we'll see a motivated human being. And we'll see somebody who will need some care, some support, some attention, and maybe some learning. But I think we'll see a human being that's animated towards a task or an activity or some work, who doesn't need managing, who doesn't need controlling, who doesn't need rigorous scrutiny, I guess you'd say. So I think that's how you look to counter comfort and stagnation, is look at what people are going to be affiliated to, even if you grow. And so I guess going back to my original point about the big, massive enterprise where somebody said, yeah, we're trying to make everything a bit smaller, a bit tighter, that was to bring that affiliation really strongly to the front of people's minds. So I guess I've read about organizations which are very entrepreneurial, or they buy an entrepreneurial organization and merge and acquire them. And then they wonder what to do with this entrepreneurial person who started it. And they often don't want to subsume them within the machine, so they keep them out on the edge, and they refer to them as a spin out, or in old terminology, you had things like, the sort of the garage, or the kind of the innovation zone, or the lab, or something. But I think that's because that person's affiliation is to newness, is to creating different, and so you don't want to bring them in and make them a general manager. You want them to still be entrepreneurial and new and discover things. So yeah, so I think that's how I'd answer that. Affiliation. What are people affiliated to? And I think that's a question we probably don't ask enough in the workplace. What are you affiliated to?
And how to make that affiliation in line with your company vision?
Yeah.
Or should it? What comes first, the chicken or the egg?
It's a really good one. So again, I think we've got three dynamics in a system here. We've got people to people. So I think you can affiliate with the people around you, because you often form a really quite nice social bond with people. You trust them, they help you out, you learn from them, and you get an enterprise spirit with them. Then you have people to a system, which is probably the organization that you're talking about there. And then there's like a system to system, which is different parts of an organization that connect with different parts. So marketing connect with R&D, and sort of coding connect with design, and then testing connect with customer, or whatever it might be. So I think as long as we've got those three systems in mind, I think we understand the interplay and the connections between them and what happens. But I think it's a case of you have in you a sense of what you want to be affiliated to, who you are, and what sort of expresses your beliefs and value systems and your skills. And then you find places at work that can either exemplify all of those, or the most important ones. And if that's it, that's when the magic happens. So I think it starts with you, and it starts with what are my needs and what are my affiliations, and can this company provide them? And I think that's the kind of critical question that people are probably not asking, and maybe are sort of evident as soon as you're onboarded, as soon as you've joined a company. You can probably tell whether your needs and beliefs and values and skills are the sort of thing that you can affiliate with a company, or if not, then maybe there's something you can do to create a different sort of affiliation by giving them a new enterprise to build around you. So if you came to a company like Nearsoft, and you were absolutely brilliant on user experience, and you had an emerging user experience team, but this person came in with a certain brilliance in it, then really their affiliation would be to that craft of UX and to lift the level. And if Nearsoft said, yeah, we want that, great, that would happen. If Nearsoft said, no, we're okay with that, then that affiliation would be broken, and they would probably have to take that elsewhere. So I think it's what you've got, and aligning it to what the company either has already or the company could grow.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry. Kim, can I step in?
Sure.
Just a quick reminder for the audience that if you have any questions for Perry, please send them my Twitter. Our handle is right here at DojoLIVE.
Yay.
Just go to Twitter, send us your questions, and we'll read them up to Perry. He'll respond. So, Perry, I have a question of my own.
Yeah, go for it.
And I'm going to quote you here. You say that self-managed ways of working are capturing a lot of attention across the business world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and from the way I understand it is that, at least from what I've seen, is that this is happening mostly in the technology world,
yeah.
like tech world, startups, and so on and so forth. But also, there's, in comparison, there's the corporate mega structures.
Mm-hmm.
How can we move more of corporate mega structures to humanize,
yeah.
self-organize, and especially this particular topic that pulled my attention: unmanage.
Yeah.
Unmanage their endeavor. So, how can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so I think what I see a lot of, and let's use professional services maybe as an example. It's quite surprising actually when you look behind the curtains of some of the law firms in the world that actually they're a little bit more self-organized than we give them credit for. We think of a law firm as having a very strict hierarchy and code of control and so on. But I've seen examples where some law firms have very distinct specialities, I guess, where what they do is pretty much their enterprise just under the brand of a particular law firm. So you would knock on their door and say, hey, self-management's great and we'd like to help you with that. And you would look at their processes and protocols and think, wow, actually most of what you do is pretty self-organized already, because you're the head of patent law, and the way you run what you do is that you get all your patent lawyers to go out and do their own thing, and yes, they're fee charging, revenue earning individuals, but they're actually a little bit more self-regulating and self-starting and self-managing than most people would give them credit for. So it's just that they don't label themselves that way. So some of it is what Kim said earlier on. It's just the awareness that actually self-organized is a thing. Some people tend to do it and just think it's kind of slightly lackadaisical, slightly messy, chaotic, slightly unstructured things. So that's the first point I'd make about that, is there's probably more people doing it than we realize. The other thing, though, about the megacorps is where I guess I'm starting to see a much more adaptive need from them, because I think what they used to do, so this is just my experience of working with these guys, is they'd have clients, they'd get work coming in, they'd ship lots of people into that project, they'd do all sorts of amazing stuff on that project, and then they'd be moving on to the next one. And it was all very orchestrated. It felt literally like they were a massive orchestra, and there was just sort of a senior partner kind of conducting when they got to do what they do. So it felt very much like they were at the behest of others. And if you wanted to go anywhere to have influence, you'd have to climb a ladder and get into a very senior management position. Now I'm getting the sense that even those companies are starting to realize just how much bureaucracy they have, how much effort is wasted on just servicing their own kind of internal needs. And they're looking for ways to be more economic and more efficient and more customer savvy and more in touch with the needs of different clients and different opportunities. And the only way I think they're starting to realize that is that they need to let their people have a little bit more say in the control around them, and to maybe sort of liberate a little bit and let go. So I think we're starting to see people in those organizations want to do it, but they're caught in a trap, I think, of the orthodoxies they have are so deep-rooted, they feel if they unpick them, the whole thing's just going to fall apart. And so I think there's something about a fear and a reluctance to go against something which is a revenue-earning entity, But I think the answers are that they should create some small-scale experiments. They should create a number of different spin-outs and skunk works and all those kinds of things, just to explore whether that kind of model has a greater customer centricity, has an increased satisfaction level, reduces attrition, hires the best talent. So I think they're trading off their brand at the moment, and I think that will start to become less appealing, and they'll have to create another kind of incentive and another affiliation. So that's how I'd advise bigger companies to do it, is to keep the infrastructure, but have inside it huge amounts of sort of smaller, tight units of people who are very self-regulated, self-adaptive, and have less management and bureaucracy.
Cool. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Perry. Kim?
No, I like that idea. I think, and I'm trying to blank on his name, but I don't know if this is one of the founders of the higher ups in Starbucks, I think, is famous for saying the person who sweeps the floor should choose the broom. Something to that effect, right? And I think that's the idea, like, that who better knows how to do their jobs than the people who are doing their jobs.
It's an interesting one, actually, that I've had conversations with people in the healthcare industry over here in the UK, because it's such a...
Or education. That's another one where teachers are like, who are these people making these laws and making these decisions when they've never stepped foot in a classroom?
Totally right. So in the UK, I think we have a lot of tension with healthcare and education here about the autonomy that people don't have. So I've spoken to healthcare professionals who would love nothing else than much more control and say over how they run the part of the business they're in and so on. But they feel like they have to comply to a very cookie cutter template approach to how everything's done. But when you're in a certain geography with a certain age demographic or a certain ethnicity, then that cookie cutter approach doesn't work. It needs incredible adaptiveness. And I think that's the one thing I really love about self-managed organizations, is their tuning is different. Their tuning is not to the process. Their tuning is to human need. And that's both inside an organization and outside an organization. So where I see it being so strong in technology is because technology is only as good as understanding the users of the product you're building are the reason you do it in the first place. And yes, it might look great, but if nobody needs it, then it's not going to get any traction. So I think that's where I see a different commentary, I guess, coming in from people that have much more autonomy and much more chance to influence. And so I guess where I see companies lacking in innovation is because they've got over-managed protocols. They've got too much management bureaucracy. They've got too much of a risk aversion, and they want to kind of vacuum everything through a machine. Where it's self-organized and people have the chance to create an idea, to gather a movement around the idea, and even try it out, that's when you see organizations flourish, and you see people being affiliated much more tightly to the reason that company's there and its continued growth and its sort of sustained levels of performance. We in the UK, and possibly over on your side of the pond, had a big push several years ago about corporate social responsibility. How ethical are you, and how green are you, and so on. And it became something really nice for a while, but then it became another corporate buzz phrase that was used over and over again. Yet, if you allow people to drive a kind of corporate social responsibility agenda, if you allow them to connect with their community around them, if you allow them to explore the option between, installing your own wind turbine versus still buying electricity off the grid, those are the things that people come to life about, and those are the things that people will do extra effort towards. They'll do their job, and they'll do the things that are passionate and important to you. And one of the things I've seen in more regulated corporations is that if you don't have that space, if you don't create, the white space around the sort of corporate governance, then people will just do exactly what they're contracted to do, and they won't ever give you those extra dimensions. So some of the companies that you see, like the carpet tile manufacturer Interface, who have a really ethical and very open way of people sort of, I don't know, I guess you'd say, creating the organization that cares about the planet that just happens to produce carpet tiles. That's where people have such a strong affiliation to the brand and to the future of the brand. You get great things happen. If you try to manage that, you'd never get it. So I think there's something about human spirit and endeavor and innovation that if we try and manage it, it just shrinks. But if we don't manage it, it grows. Do you know what I mean? It's literally that strongly pronounced.
And I think speaking about that particular company, I'm sorry, what's the name of the carpet manufacturer you just mentioned? I hadn't heard of them before.
Interface.
Okay. What I like about that is the idea, and that's something that we've touched on quite a lot in our Dojo Live season this year, is doing something beyond making money. What they do, like I work here and I love it because we have a purpose, and that purpose, well, yes, we make carpet. Yes, we all need to cut a paycheck and pay our mortgage, but we go beyond that. And I think that's the idea of the company too, giving back to the community as well as to the people who work for them, where it's not just a select few whose pockets get deeper and deeper and deeper, but those people don't even really care about that. Like they're not in it for the money. The money is just a byproduct of doing what you love and doing it well. Yeah.
No, I think that's right. So I've got a pre-prepared post-it note here that I can just put up on screen, and hopefully you can see that. So it talks about 4 levels of system. You have at the top, you have the micro system, which is you. Then you have what's next is the meso system, which is the network. Then you have the ecosystem, which is largely in a company sense. It's the company's brand and its buildings and its presence. And then you have the macro system.
Can you slide it over a little?
Culture.
We can't. There we go. Okay. Oh,
how's that?
Other way. We can't see the macro image.
How's that?
A little more to your right.
To my right there.
There you go. There we got
How's
it.
that? Okay.
There we got
it. So we've got micro, meso, eco, and macro as the 4 systems that are at play. And I think what you just described there is how those 4 things can come together. So, you may have, I'm really passionate about something to do with the environment and green energy maybe. And then you find there are other people in your company who are also into that, and you create this meso system, this network. Then it can start to gather enough traction that it impacts on the ecosystem, which is the company's physical assets and its revenue and all those kinds of things. And that's all about a macro system, which is you then create a culture where people go, I know you're the company that cares about green energy, so I'm going to want to join you because I know that started from one person having an idea that created a network, that created an enterprise, that shifted the balance. Now, you're not going to get that unless you have some form of self-managed and self-organized enterprise allowable within your structure. Because otherwise it will become a staff suggestion scheme written down on a piece of paper, put in a suggestion box, and nothing ever happens to it. Because it will go into the machine, it will go into the bureaucracy, it will go into the system. So I just think organizations are saying, yeah, we want our people to be more connected. We want innovation. We want all these things. And I'm like, yeah, but you put it all down the funnel of a system instead of letting things naturally evolve and letting them grow and have an energy of their own. And I think that's where my real disdain for people pushing self-management into the it's too chaotic box really kind of gets to me. It's like, so you are never going to get true innovation. You're never going to get true engagement if you try and manage everything. I think if you try and manage everything, you'll manage it to suffocation.
And I think that's the trust, where it comes down to trusting who's on your team, who you hired, realizing that they are responsible individuals who will get the job done that they were hired for. And then within that, the liberty to think outside the box and the freedom to spend some time and search amongst themselves for things that they're passionate about. And I think that's something that perhaps is the hard, jagged pill to swallow. Like, are we really responsible? Will they really do their jobs?
And I'm just looking at the World Blue 10 principles of organizational democracy here that I've got in front of me. And so I was drawn to these because obviously Nearsoft is a World Blue company, and I'm very closely affiliated to Tracy, Miranda, and everybody else working within the World Blue family. And so a couple of the things that really stand out about a democratic organization are completely akin to a self-managed organization, and that's around the decentralization element for a start. It's that somebody in a traditionally managed organization, going back to a point I think we touched on earlier, if you want to transform an existing organization, especially if there's a big one, somebody will need to say, we are going to distribute power. We are going to distribute authority. We're going to distribute how you do things and get sign off and approval and so on. When that starts to happen, then I think that needs to be matched with another of the World Blue principles, which is accountability. People need to understand now, in that sort of situation, that where previously somebody else was accountable for a decision, it's now down to you. That comes at a price. Some people love the fact that they've now got accountability. Other people feel a little bit frightened by the fact that this shield of a manager has been removed from their structure. So I think those two things are really important. It has to start with a symbolic letting go, but then equally it has to be matched with a need for people to understand that they're now in a more accountable position by virtue of that letting go. So we ought not forget that whilst in principle it sounds good if you want more innovation to just let people do things, you have to kind of set a process in mind for people that they know that's decentralized activity now, but equally that they're accountable. So if you have a good idea, it might be you're accountable for researching it and for creating the network and trying it out and proving the concept, whereas before you could have just filled in a form and thrown it at somebody else. And so I think that's a question. If I was running an enterprise of any size, A, am I prepared to decentralize, and what will that mean to letting go of power? And B, are people ready for that accountability?
Mm-hmm.
And that might come with some support and guidance and training and learning and all those kind of things. So those two things I think are really important if you're starting to talk about scaling self-management.
I like that, the letting go and the accountability. And I think it's something too that, like you mentioned, some people are into that and some people are intimidated by that, and that's perfectly fine. But perhaps it's important for a company who's interested in moving this direction to make that known from the start when at all possible. That's something that in yourself we take. I think we touched on this a lot actually, is just our recruitment and our interview process. And from the very start, we have something that we call cultural fit. And it's something that we bring to the attention, I think, of those who we're interviewing. Of like, this is how we work. Like, how do you feel about that?
And that talks back to that system I talked about, the macro system there. That's the whole thing that wraps around it, right? So I've got another phrase for you, which is slightly moving on from cultural fit, which is that.
Enrichment.
Yeah. So I think we ought to recruit people who don't just fit our culture, but enrich our culture. So there's an interesting thing about that. But again, I don't think you get that when you have a rigid system of, competency-based interviews with 3 people on a panel and so on. I think you get that sort of thing when you allow people to get a little bit more involved themselves in bringing people into the organization. That's right. So that got me thinking, Kim, actually, when you mentioned that, about something that both Paul Green Jr. from Morningstar mentioned last week at a conference in Brighton. And again, something that came out from, I think it's a guy called Gerard Egan, who wrote a book about how we learn in our sort of social environment. And it's the phrase that an organization is a social technology, which is quite a nice phrase, isn't it? And so I think there's something in the fact that, an organization doesn't really exist. It's a brand and it's buildings and so on, but it's nothing without the people who come together to make it something, right? So we haven't got any fully robotic organizations yet that have been built and grown and run by robots only. So with that in mind, there's always people involved, and so it's therefore a social technology. And I guess what I've seen in the workplace over my sort of 20 plus years in operating on it, it's become an unsocial technology in many respects, because it's just been mechanized and bureaucratized and managed and hierarchically kind of layered, that it does feel like an anti-social environment. And the one thing that brings me to life when I see self-organized teams, and it comes back to that thing about, loving Mondays again, is that if you get up on a Monday and think, hey, this is just a different part of my life, I'm just going into a different social technological environment that just happens to be work where I get paid, then I just think it shifts the emphasis from, plugging into the matrix and just being a processor of stuff. And it comes back to that thing I talked about, the need for affiliation. So I think there's something we ought to make sure that we, I guess, sort of promote a little bit more about self-managed and self-organized, which is that every organization is in itself a social technology. So how social do you want or need your technology to be in your organization? and that would probably give people a stimulus maybe to start thinking about how they could deregulate a little bit and re-socialize.
Perry, I'd like to ask you, would you mind repeating for myself and the audience also what you meant by when you showed us the post-it note with the cultural enrichment part?
Cultural enrichment.
So, what did you mean by that?
So I guess the thing I think about a company is it gets to a certain point in its size and it has to start recruiting people. And so you then start to think, well, what kind of people do we want? Well, we want people who get it. We want people who get us, who can understand the way we work is a little bit different. So we start talking about cultural fit, and I think that's fine. And then you keep going along that line, and all you're looking for is the same as you had before.
And in a way, that innovation goes to the
So
wayside.
What I mean by cultural enrichment is that you might find somebody who gets enough of what you do, but actually would be a catalyst or a challenger for making sure that as you grew, you didn't just become a slightly funkier parody of those people who do it the traditional way. So I think cultural enrichment is thinking, now if we get this woman in, she's got very strong views about this, that could be quite dangerous, but actually we probably need somebody who can make sure that we aren't missing out on an opportunity to diversify the product range or get into a different geography or something, I don't know. So that's what I mean by cultural enrichment. I mean having the bravery, I guess, to say, yeah, we think they fit, but they're quite a spiky fit. They're quite a kind of frictional fit. And I guess that would test how your ecosystem and how your culture would embrace that kind of challenge and stretch your culture to being a little bit more inclusive and dynamic and innovative as it was before. And I guess there is a fear that if you go for cultural fit all the time, are you creating a slightly hip version of homogenous workforce? Do you know what I mean? Yeah, so that's what I mean by that.
Okay. Thank you, Perry. Yeah, cool. I just wanted to make sure that I got it right so that we can also share it with the audience as well.
Yeah, I just saw the tweet. Nice, thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Kim? Go ahead, Perry.
I'm just kind of taking a little bit of back. That's a lot of food for thought for me. I like that a lot.
Okay, cool. And I suppose the thing I really like about a self-organized team and a self-managed approach is that something like cultural enrichment has so little definition because it doesn't need to, but you sort of feel the wisdom of the self-managed team as a crowd would make the right hire, would bring the right cultural enrichment in, because that is probably nobody's gift to define. You know, no matter how clever people thought they were, they can't really say, go and get us somebody like this. You'd want it to be so that the self-organized team would come across somebody and they'd go, whoa, they're really interesting, but a little bit dangerous, but we think they can help us. Let's bring them in. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing.
All right. Excuse me, just a little interruption. We're approaching the final quarter of today's broadcast.
Wow, it's gone quick.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just having a blast here, and I know that
time flies when you're having.
There are going to be a lot of items that are going to have to remain in the middle burner. But so, Kim, I'd like to move on to you. Do you have any other questions for Perry, or shall we just jump into something else? I got my own, of course, but I want to pass on the mic to you if you have something.
No, I mean, I think today's been very enlightening, given me a lot of food for thought, actually, particularly with the culture enrichment. I like that. I think I see that as a next step for a company like our own. I guess my only question is, when we talk about the future, or maybe it's not really a question, but I think of the future, and I believe that most change happens at a university level, at least in the United States, culturally speaking. It's when we leave our homes, go out on your own, leave the nest, to start earning your own money, making your own decisions, not having a curfew and all those things. And then you go to university and you start to see diversity outside of that homogenous life or people of your likeness. And I think you grow and you learn a lot, not only in your field of study, but as a person. And so I really think that the university is kind of like the game changer in the world. If you change university, you change the world. And that said, a lot of those people coming fresh out of college or whatever, especially now, are really in the idea of you know, startups and doing my own thing and this millennial mindset. And so do you think that that's where this needs to start? Like, is it easier to break into existing corporations, or is it going to be in our best interest to influence and evangelize that next generation of corporate builders? I don't know if that makes sense.
What a great question. Yeah, I think I guess I do some lecturing at universities in the UK, and I ask the students who are studying HR, I say, you know, where do you want to be? What kind of company would you join to be an ideal place for you to do your HR? And most of them will say companies like Virgin and Apple and Google, and they'll talk about them in such a way. And it's like, well, why do you say that? Because yes, they're popular, but what do you think you could do within HR there? And they talk about the fact that it feels like it's quite free and it's quite open and there's a humanity to it and it's quite liberating. And that gives me a strong sense of what people see beyond just a brand that sells well or is a, you know, premium search engine or whatever it is. It's how it feels. So I don't think we necessarily teach that enough in universities about company culture being something that isn't just a kind of a constructed thing. It's grown and it's added to by the people and so on. So yeah, I think we can bring some of that into education, where we can make sure people know that self-organized teams and this whole humanity aspect within a workplace is something we're likely to see more of, and something that actually they shouldn't be surprised if they come across it, or they might want to seek it out if they're that way inclined. And so I guess instead of setting people up to be, you know, sort of like, you know, the next Gordon Gekko or whatever it is, they can start thinking about, well, maybe I can be the next Dustin Moskovitz then instead. And so there is this kind of hipness, isn't there, to startups? But it's not necessarily just startups, but find companies where you can have that affiliation. What you do matters, and it's part of you, and so on and so forth. And it becomes more of a craft than just a job. So I don't think there's anything wrong in giving people that sense of ambition. And so I suppose the other thing about it would be not just to educate them about their choices in where they take their endeavours, but I suppose just understanding themselves a little bit more and saying, you know, what level of accountability are you really made for and want to do, and so on. So I think we could get people to be a little bit more emotionally intelligent before they jump into the workforce. And know a bit more about themselves and their needs. And I think we need to say to people, look, it's okay to find good work. Don't necessarily just go looking for a job. Because I think the package of a job has been oversold a bit now. And I think people think the only way you get a job is if you join a very established company and you get on that sort of trail. But actually, you could just find some work and build a picture of what you're really all about and use that to find your perfect place to be. And so that might come from a bit of gigging, a bit of project work, an internship, a community project, whatever it might be. But find out more about you and what brings you to life. I like using this quote from Howard Thurman, actually. He says, find out what brings you, what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is not necessarily the question you need to ask. The world needs more people who know what brings them to life. Do you know what I mean by that?
I think so. But I think it's easily confused with this conception that meeting my own needs is selfish.
Yeah.
Or this like crybaby millennial, welcome to the real world kid kind of mentality. So how do you combat that? Like, it's not necessarily about that, but why? Why is it important to find what brings us to life when the world isn't supposed to be about me?
Yeah, but I suppose the Thurman quote would say that the more people who understand what their magnetic north is and their center of gravity, then the more people are likely to find a place where that happens. And so I think let's look at one of the biggest problems in the 21st century, which is mental ill health and stress. That's because people are working in an environment that isn't something that brings them to life. It's something that gives them stress and anxiety and tension and all sorts of awful things. And we want to avoid that. There's an economic cost to that as well as a humanitarian cost to that. So my answer to that would be, that is not an indulgent millennial thing. That's people finding the beauty and the essence of what life is all about. You know, that's you know, let's go really big on the philosophy behind it. That if people are understanding themselves in terms of what they're good at, what they're motivated by, the sector they want to work in and so on, and they find that, then they'll have joy, and we'll have a lower suicide rate, we'll have a lower health bill, we'll have more happy people as parents, we'll have happier children. So I think there's just something about that chain reaction to people who are in the drudgery of work that I just don't want to see anymore. I want to see people who have thought about themselves, lined themselves up, and delivered on their own promise to themselves.
I love that.
Thank you, Barry.
Matter of fact, I don't know how we could end the talk any better, to be honest.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we're approaching the final minutes, and before we wrap up today's session, can you tell us a little bit about human resourced? And
Human
also,
resource.
yeah, and also this time it's personnel
Okay.
for the record.
Yeah. So there's 2 books that were put together by a very clever and witty chap in the UK who's an HR practitioner called David D'Souza. He said, there's a lot of people out there in the UK and US and European HR communities writing blogs. They're very good and they're very scattered. Would it be a good idea to kind of create like an almanac of all of these blogs? And so a lot of people went, what a good idea. And so they all kind of joined in and provided a blog for the publication. And then David went through the mechanism of getting them put into a book and getting some cover artwork done. And then 2 volumes came out of lots of random collections of HR practitioners who were passionate about something, who just wrote a blog, and it was included in a book of blogs. So it's almost like, I remember, sort of punk music in the UK, and people would create fanzines. They would write articles about bands they'd seen, and they would photocopy it and send it out in all sorts of envelopes and stuff through doors and stuff. It felt like the digital version of that. Do you know what I mean? It's like we were all putting together a fanzine. Now, the interesting thing about that is I've equally then been into corporate cultures and some companies who have opened up their blogging platform to people internally, and this ragtag ensemble of posts from all over the place. But actually people sort of write themselves into existence. They write themselves into a sense of affiliation. So I quite like the fact that for a moment it gave us a sense of something, a sense of a tiny little movement to agitate towards a better HR proposition, I guess, in the world we operate in. But it was good fun. And something that I'm really happy to have been involved in.
The name of the book is? I'm sorry, I didn't catch it.
So the first one was Humane Resourced.
Okay.
And then there was a follow-up called This Time It's Personnel.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah, nice little.
It's kind of a play on words between this time it's personal.
That's right.
To this time it's personnel.
I know, exactly.
Cool.
There's a bit of an in-joke about human resources and personnel and the labels that are attached to it.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, good fun.
It is fun. And I venture to say, I assume that even since it's a series of blogs and opinions, there may have even been some conflicting posts. So you read one and then you turn the page and you read one that says something directly contrary to what you absolutely
no editorial control at all. So it's like the chaotic self-managed version of publishing. But actually what I think I found about it was it gave you a little window to everybody's world. And this ragtag ensemble of posts, like I said, it didn't have any story to it at all, but it gave you a smile. It made you think a little bit about a few things that HR's guilty of and that HR could be doing more of. So the outcome after reading the blog was actually, it was random, but it still gave me something. Do you know what I mean?
But actually, like, I'm sure there's randomness to it, but it'd be actually interesting case study. Maybe I'll encourage our people development team to work with our UX team. They can read it and see what UX sees and finds in those categories,
That
using different methods, right?
Yeah. It would probably defy every persona map ever done about anything ever.
So we'll have to see. Are you guys up for it?
Yeah. But I think, just to almost wrap up the whole self-organized thing, I think that's the thing, I think it's like, no matter how much you try and manage people, that they're a sentient being with passions and desires that you can't always predict. And so that's why I love self-management so much, because it doesn't try and do that. It just lets that flow. And the outcomes are normally far more sticky, lasting, and positive than if you try to engineer something. So I think we've got to stop at over-engineering people and just let them be natural, flowing, organic, random, slightly chaotic, slightly messy systems, and expect just the most amazing things that you couldn't predict.
Right. If it makes for a good read, it can make for a good company.
Totally right. Totally right.
Excellent. All right. Well, unfortunately, we need to wrap up today's session. So, Perry, I need to ask you if there are any final words of wisdom that you would like to share with our audience today.
I think Kim talked about it earlier on when she said about evangelizing. And I think when you work in a self-organized company, it can feel like it's the best thing ever. And you almost want to keep it as a secret and say, yeah, but I work in a self-organized company. I don't want everybody to do this because it will kind of ruin how special I feel. Yeah, I think there's an obligation, actually, to just say to the rest of the world, what, you don't do self-management? Whoa, man. Come on, you better get with the program type thing and promote it in all the right ways. Because I think the more we can get this stuff out there, the more we can see this humanity coming back into work. And the more people that will have this Monday feeling of, you know what, it's just a different social technology I'm connecting to this week. So I'd say, yeah.
They really are interested.
Yeah. They are.
Like just last week, I was at a birthday party, and it turns out that the husband of one of the women who I know that was there is the one who painted, came into Nearsoft and painted our walls. And he was talking to me. He's like, wow, like, I was really blown away, like, to see the way people work and this and how fun it is and this and that. And and so it actually gave me my soapbox to talk about it. And it's interesting, like, really everybody's interested.
Yeah.
Painters are interested in self-management.
Yeah. So I think I do that. I just encourage anybody who's involved in self-organized to share the spirit of it and get more people interested in it, and make sure that there's an affiliation then between people who are curious about self-management and people who've done it, and then I think we'll see a bigger sweep and a bigger change, and we might see more people operating like that sort of human way.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Perry.
Right.
Okay. Well, as they say that all good things must come to an end. I think it's a cliche, but I have to say it. Okay. Right. So, Perry, the only thing is just here's a big thank you to you for being here with us today and for accommodating the time zone differences, which I believe to be 6 hours or so to Central Standard Time.
Yeah.
And again, and also thank you, Kim. As ever, I'll see you next week at our team building week. And Perry, we're going to be in touch. I'll send you the link with your recorded episode after we're done. And we're going to be in touch. And thank you so much for your time and shared your views today.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys. Adios.
Have a great one. Adios. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, we pulled it.
We're still live, I think. I see the button.